second lecture. Right. Thank you and welcome back to the second lecture, and here we're going to cover in the TrainMOS Pilot Action 5 the concept of motorways of the sea. And I'm Alfred Baird from Edinburgh Napier University, so we're going to cover the motorways of the sea as a concept. And what we're going to talk about here is it's split up into four areas. First of all, a discussion on motorways of the sea, what we think motorways of the sea are, and how they relate to other transport modes. And after that, what we've got here is some coverage of motorways of the sea research that we've been involved in and others in TrainMOS have been involved in for quite some period, looking at how motorways of the sea research has informed the motorways of the sea as a concept and a reality, and some of the problems and perceptions of short sea shipping which has led to the motorways of the sea policies and developments. And finally, we try to help redefine what we mean by motorways of the sea as a concept for today and the future. So here we are again with the nice comic cartoon about what motorways of the sea really is about. Modal shift from congested, capacity-constrained, polluted roads to sea transport. It often sounds straightforward and simple, but the reality tells us it's actually very complex, with many different factors involved in how to make it happen. So if we go back to what we think of transport in general and transport modes, we know that transport infrastructure, many people tell us, comprises roads, railways, airports and ports, the main parts of transport infrastructure. Roads, railways, airports and ports. And there's a lot of literature on that relates to that. In this context, maritime transport infrastructure is very often regarded as ports. So policymakers, others, public agencies will regard maritime transport infrastructure, and of course economists and maritime economists, academics will regard maritime transport infrastructure, and they do, as primarily ports. And hinterland connections comprise, connections to ports consist of road, rail, canals, and also pipelines. And that seems fairly straightforward enough. But it brings forward some complications when we start to consider the motorways of the sea as a seaway, because it raises questions about, we know that what a railway and a roadway platform is, but what is the seaway? Many transport economists have regarded the sea as even a kind of free highway. But is the port in this context really a seaway? We think it's not, obviously. The port acts rather like a node. So how does the port relate to the seaway? And what is, in effect, maritime transport infrastructure? Is it just the port? Or is it something lighter than that? Ports, transport economists, port engineers would regard the port as transport infrastructure, maritime transport infrastructure, but it doesn't really provide the seaway connectivity that we need. So if we go back to this idea about modal shift, which is about transferring freight from road to sea, we need to think about the road as transport infrastructure and the seaway as transport infrastructure. But what is, in effect, the seaway? We don't mean it's transferring freight from road to port. So transport economists might regard the ports as maritime transport infrastructure, but when we talk about modal shift from road to ports, that doesn't quite give you the transfer that you want. So it leads to some uncertainty about what is meant by the seaway, and this is where I think the work that we have done at Edinburgh Napier and also with Javier Jose of Puertos Estados is important about trying to help redefine what we mean by motorways of the sea. So we can say that roadway and railway platforms are relatively easily understood concepts. In fact, I think it was Professor Goss at Cardiff who once said that at one time the UK government was considering establishing a ministry of ways, transport ways, roadways, railways, airways, seaways. But they decided just to call it the Ministry of Transport. So this idea of ways is quite an important concept. And in fact, tomorrow we're going to see the DFDS terminal and service at Rosyth. It's called DFDS Seaways. And this term seaway is very important when we think about maritime transport infrastructure. So roadway and railway platforms are relatively easily understood concepts for everyone. Both provide a fixed transport link on a route. They provide for territorial continuity, which otherwise wouldn't be provided for without these platforms. But really, we have to come back to this question: what is the comparable maritime transport infrastructure to a roadway and a railway platform, both of which may extend to hundreds, if not thousands of kilometres, and has to be provided to provide that platform for the territorial access? We go back to the rationale, or one of the rationales, why Motorways of the Sea is a policy, and one of the fundamental reasons here is that the argument that sea transport is one of the only modes able to keep up with the pace of road transport. Because it's difficult to create new land infrastructure, particularly for rail as well as road, sea transport is regarded as one of the opportunities where growth potential is available. The sea is there and it can be used, whereas to create new road and rail capacity takes a long time and is problematic. So ships and ports then are considered here in the context of modal shift, and modal shift is about transferring road freight from road to the sea, or motorways of the sea. But we come back to this issue is that only ports are, in many cases, many member states, publicly funded as maritime transport infrastructure. So we still have this funding issue in the public domain: road, rail, port, as being the infrastructure that's publicly funded in many cases. But the port fundamentally is simply a node in the context of a seaway or sea transport, or any transport mode. And I think it's easy to, relatively logical to argue that the port is not the actual seaway platform, and we'll demonstrate this in visual form shortly. So we can also consider this philosophy of short sea shipping, which has been a big high on the agenda of transport for the last few decades. And short sea shipping here is defined by the Commission as the movement of cargo passengers by sea between ports within geographical Europe, or between those ports situated in non-European countries having a coastline honouring closed seas bordering Europe. So it's, in a sense, short sea shipping is intra-European shipping. And short sea shipping initiatives have developed very, very extensively and very rapidly. But the other question here is, apart from ports being the seaway or not, and maritime transport infrastructure, or what is maritime transport infrastructure, the other question is short sea shipping the same thing as motorways of the sea? And how do they differ? And does it matter? So we go back to this slide showing that we have long existing coastal navigation within Europe and many other parts of the world, but Europe going back 5,000 years to Neolithic times and so on. So shipping is nothing new in that sense. And the Motorways of the Sea policy today is, in some respects, a continuation of that as land transport systems become somewhat congested and difficult. So here we have the situation where we do have road and rail networks, most cases publicly funded, in most cases. But the sea transport connections, we have seaways, which are in this Commission map loosely drawn on to provide ideas of where the sea transport connections are. But the assumption is that the market, to a large extent, will provide these seaways, whereas the road and rail system within Europe as a whole is to a large extent publicly funded. So this does raise a basic economic issue, which brings us back to this question. And ports will often argue that ports are maritime transport infrastructure. And not many people would disagree with that. Port does seem to be maritime transport. But if you look at other definitions of what ports are, you might come to a slightly different view. Here the UN Conference on Trade and Development give us an idea. Ports are nodal points along a transport chain. So, yeah, we know that ports are nodes, but we also know from that they're not the transport chain. They're nodal points along a transport. They're interfaces, they're interchanges between modes. And then we see the other idea here that from Saraftis, that ports will play an important role for motorways of the sea. But what that tells you straight away really is that ports are not the motorway of the sea. They will play an important role for motorways of the sea, but so will road and rail connect and other modes, perhaps. So, but the port is not the motorway of the sea. The port is part of the overall motorway of the sea product. And then if we go further, we can see that what is the main requirement for a port? The main requirement for a port is actually land. Land for storage, land for access, road and rail access, and so on. So in a sense, you could say that a port is mainly composed of land infrastructure. A port needs land and sea access in equal measure quite often, because everything that comes in by sea has to go away generally by land, by road and rail. And equally everything that comes in has to come in by road and rail and go out by sea. So what this brings us to conclude really is that a port is not comparable to a roadway or a railway running perhaps hundreds or thousands of kilometers, providing the territorial continuity between two or more points. So this definition of the port as being the maritime transport infrastructure in that sense is quite widely wrong. The port has maritime functions, but it also has land transport functions, and its main requirement is land. So in that sense, this adds a new dimension, but this also brings us back to this key point. What is the seaway? What is the motorway of the sea? And why is its funding requirements and policy requirements different from roadway and railway? So here's a simple thing that I've put together in a previous publication where you can see two things. For road, rail and sea, roadway, railway and seaway, you see the roadways, the broken line, and you see the nodes. And for the road, it can be, the nodes can be, for example, a motorway intersection or something, but you still have the roadway platform, the 4 or 6 lane roadway platform that has to be provided hundreds or thousands of kilometers. And then the railway is the same. You need the terminals at either end, and you need the track going through. And for the maritime transport infrastructure, you have the ports, which are nodes, but you need the seaway connection. Seaway connection. So the question really is, what is the seaway connection? Is it water? As transport economists often argue, the sea is a free highway. Is the sea a free highway? And that's an interesting question. You put trailers or containers in the sea, they don't usually go anywhere. You have to provide the platform. So the question is, what is the platform? And the way that we've developed our work in this suggests that the platform really focuses on the deck of the ship. And this is accepted by quite a number of people within the Motorways of the Sea discussion, debate, policy side, that the seaway is infrastructure mobile infrastructure, but it has to be provided by someone. And this has been published in an article which I did called Redefining Maritime Transport Infrastructure, and I decided to publish it not in a maritime journal, but in a civil engineering journal. And the reason it was published in a civil engineering journal is because this is a journal that's focusing very much on roadway, railway building, bridges, tunnels, fixed infrastructure, and so on. And this idea that the ship is mobile infrastructure seems to be, it's an ancient idea, but it's also a new one in relating to modern transport economics. And it has implications for the policy and funding issues that we have to consider. So what I want to briefly cover is a number of studies which we've been involved in with other European partners and others, looking at motorways of the sea research. Very briefly, 5 studies over the last 20 years. So here we have the studies. One was on an idea for a new service between Scotland and England back in 1993, funded by Scottish Enterprise. European Marine Motorways, which was funded by the European Commission's 4th Framework Programme. The study of the Japan Marine Highway Services, which Japan has one of the most extensive marine shipping service systems in the world on a domestic cabotage kind of system. ZScot was short for Zealand Scotland, the project to develop the motorway of the sea from Scotland to the continent of Europe, funded by the Pilot Actions for Combined Transport programme, and also assisted by Scottish Enterprise, and also another UK marine motorway study funded by the Department for Transport and the Engineering Physical Science Research Council, which we undertook with Harry Watt. So here's the first study, and I'll just briefly show you what the study was about and then what it found. So this was the Scotland-England Marine Highway Study. It's about moving freight from road to sea on routes within the UK. It was funded by Scottish Enterprise. Actually, we'd won a prize from Scottish Enterprise for one of the innovative projects in Scotland that year to develop this research, which was very helpful. And it was to establish the feasibility, and it was ourselves. And that was the idea, basically, to look at a freight ferry service from Edinburgh to London, and we also studied another route from the Clyde to the Mersey, Glasgow to Liverpool. So what did this study find? At this time, I should mention we were also looking very closely at high-speed ferries. And high-speed ferries in the early 90s were still very popular. And this one was developed by Stena Line of Gothenburg, a very big high-speed ferry. This was one of the first high-speed ferries going over 40 knots, able to carry a lot of freight. So before the fuel prices had increased, this was a very interesting option to look at. But part of the study, and most of the focus here I just want to mention, was the Italian system, which provided us a case study of what it needs to develop a motorway of the sea. And the Italian system developed from Genoa to Sicily was the most comprehensive approach to developing a motorway of the sea that we could find. What we found from that was it started in 1992. It formed a key part of the Italian General Transport Plan, which was about reducing congestion on roads, north and south, but also improving the economic efficiency and competitiveness of Sicily. So to improve the trade connection and reduce congestion. And they bought, the government agency, Finmare, bought 5 ro-ro ships from a Dutch shipyard. Each ship could carry about 130 trailers and 50 truck drivers in 25 two-berth cabins. And they also had very good Sicilian chefs, I understand, to make very good meals for the truck drivers on these vessels to provide an incentive. The idea was to have a twice daily service, so a high frequency service, and departures and arrival times timed for the truckers. So when the truck drivers were coming out of the car factories around Milan and Torino, they could get to the port in time for a late sailing to go down to Sicily with cars and trucks on board. A key part of the requirement here was the need for fast paperwork at ports. At this time, paperwork was very slow and cumbersome. Customs bureaucracies were quite difficult and much more problematic than road transport, which was relatively free of all these issues. And another interesting part of the Italian system, the Autostrada del Mare, was the terminals were directly connected to the motorways. The terminals were outside the ports of Palermo and Genoa. They were on the motorway. So this allowed the ships and the traffic to turn around very rapidly without congestion. The initial service had a number of financial problems, but eventually other competitors came into the market with faster ships providing really good service, and now that route is a very well developed route with competitive operators running very, very high volume services. But it initially started with government intervention to buy the ships, develop the terminals, and to basically underwrite the whole thing as part of a general transport plan to reduce congestion, lead to modal shift, and improve the efficiency of the Sicilian economy. Our next study was the European Marine Motorways Study, 1996 to 98, funded by the 4th Framework Programme. And this was looking at the feasibility of fast freight ferry services on a number of routes in Europe, which I'll show you in a second. And this was a bigger consortium, which included Stena Line of Gothenburg, University of Barcelona, the Atomic Agency of France, and Policy Research, NEA Research of the Netherlands. So it's quite a slightly bigger project, well, quite a significant project, looking at a number of routes. So the basic premise of this project was that roads were running close to capacity. Railway systems were also running very close to capacity with constraints on new rail track. Coastal services had been developing, coastal ferry services had been developing, and this provided some good analysis initially, like the Via Mare service on the Mediterranean. And also there had been developments of faster vessels, so ships had been getting faster at this time in the mid-1990s, and this looked as if it presented good opportunities. So what this study was about was analysing different routes and different types of vessel. So here you can see 3 routes. The first one is a route between Gothenburg and Zeebrugge, which we studied in this project more than 15 years, well, about 15 years ago. It's actually a route today, and quite a promising route, I think. Also Plymouth to northern Spain, which today also is a motorway of the sea connection, and a route between Genoa and Barcelona, which is also today a motorway of the sea operation. And what this study did was it looked at 3 different ship types. Slow conventional type ship of the Via Mare service, a fast conventional ship type, more about 30 knot speed, which was this fast trailer carrier concept, and then the high speed option, 40 knots. So the idea was to look at the 3 options and to consider which ones would be the most likely to provide modal shift on these corridors. One of the interesting outcomes here was to look at pricing for each of the routes, and this is an example showing Milan-Barcelona, which we found at the time was a typical rate by road was around 1,200 euros. And when we evaluated this Milan-Barcelona connection, we could see that the sea could be competitive, but the sea transport leg could not really be more than 50% of the door-to-door price. And this, as it happens, turns out to be quite a common feature of many motorways of the sea today, is that the sea transport leg is only about perhaps 50% or less of the door-to-door connection, including handling costs in ports and intermodal connections at either end. But it shows you the challenge as well, because a lot of the cost here is not in the sea. The motorway of the sea is only the sea part, but it's the landside legs that can quite often be the bigger part of the cost. Not always, but quite often. So the main findings we concluded here was that for some of these routes we were looking at, the conventional railroad seemed too slow. At the time, it seemed too slow. I have to say nowadays it's not so big an issue. We think supply chains, as we'll hear this week, are more geared to accept slower transit times on many routes for the benefit of lower costs. We found that in most of these routes, fast conventional railroad, that's ships of 23, 24 knots or above, were viable but with startup support. And we found that high-speed railroad involved very, very high fuel costs, which meant there would be very high prices and there would be questionable reliability in the winter, because these ships, some of which were aluminium, were not really suited to very high wave conditions and rough weather. But we found there were constraints to fast conventional railroad startup on coastal seaways. For example, there were high port tariffs, and quite often the tariffs were not helpful to starting up low-cost services like motorways of the sea. And there were, in many cases, limited port infrastructure, which is still being addressed today in some of these corridors. There was also road transport industry inertia. The trucking industry is saying, why should I change unless there's some kind of incentive or benefit? So they were looking for the benefits, which have since been clarified in many cases, such as reduced wear and tear on vehicles, reduced insurance, and reduced maintenance. And there were also market distortions in favour of land transport platforms being provided largely by the state. So here was an example where the market was expected to provide the ships to run against publicly funded highways, and this produced added risk for the ship owner. Another study we were involved in was the Japan Marine Highway Study. That was funded by the Nippon Foundation and the Andrew Carnegie Trust in Dunfermline. And the idea here was to compare, we were also comparing the ferry industry in Japan with the UK. With this type of Japanese sponsored study, they want to know also what's happening in Europe and the UK. So that was a big part of this study. And here you can see the network of domestic ferry services within Japan, which is a very extensive range of services. I have some more details on how many services there are in a minute, but you can see there are a great number of services, and they're all on long routes, 400 to 500 miles, many of these routes, sometimes more than 500 miles, from Honshu, the main island, to the north, Hokkaido, and to the south, Kyushu. So there's a lot of really long routes here. And what we also found was they were using fast vessels, so that in the late 80s, early 90s, they had shifted away from slower 20-knot vessels, traditional roll-on, roll-off ferries, faster ships of 29 and 30 knots, operating very efficiently in heavy sea conditions in the Sea of Japan and the Pacific. So this was a very difficult area, long routes, but using fast vessels, and probably the most developed motorways of the sea system of any country in the world. This is, in Japan, they called these services the long-range ferry services. So there's other services they called isolated island services, which are much shorter connections to islands. These were the long-range trunk services running, competing against road transport and, to a lesser extent, rail. So what did we find with the Japan Marine Highway Study? We found 66 ferries operating on the long routes within the country, 13 operators, 27 routes, And they were moving in, at that time, over 2 million trucks a year on these routes, 25% of all long-distance freight in Japan. So it was a phenomenal achievement and a big industry and a competitive industry as well. But we found that it had certain characteristics that made it work. And first of all, is it had modern, large-capacity, fast, frequent, reliable ships. And these were RoPax ships. They could carry passengers, but usually a small number, maybe 500 or less, plus 100 trucks or more. The government for these services provided low-cost, long-term finance for the ships. So in a sense, the government was supporting the investment of the industry in the infrastructure, the mobile infrastructure. These were mobile motorways, and the government knew that, but they helped support the industry. They also provided a terminal infrastructure subsidy, so they helped provide the terminals in each of the ports. But I think one of the most important factors here was the truck drivers were allowed to load and discharge the ships. They didn't use, for these vessels, often registered dockers. They used truck drivers. So this was self-loading, something we've heard about so much in Europe is a big problem. But in these ports, from the 1970s onwards, apparently, the ferry industry had a dispensation to load the ships themselves because the ports could see that this was a different concept from container ships, bulk carriers, and so on. This was really requiring fast turnaround. And in addition, the regional transport authorities and other authorities had a policy of establishing logistics centres in the regions. So around each port were logistics centres, and the ports were already very much focused on logistics activities in each. So the system was assisted to a great extent by policy. And the next project we were involved in was the Zealand-Scotland project to develop the ferry service from Scotland to the continent. And we had a number of partners there, including Zealand Ports, Shipping Company, Enterprise Agency, research organisation and logistics companies. And this was, again, to look at the feasibility of a new service, and that was the new service, to move. At that time, Rosyth wasn't decided on specifically the port to use, but here you can see the idea is just a motorway of the sea to enable freight to get directly across the North Sea rather than to go all the way to Dover or to go to Hull. So the two main areas for trailer traffic for the UK. This would also lead to a distance reduction, quite significant distance reduction by sea as opposed to land transport. So the main findings here was we actually found there was a significant freight market. Can't remember what the exact figure was, but it was at least, we found there was a market of well over 100,000 trailers a year, which was much more than what was required. The current access was via remote ports. There were some road and rail access constraints, particularly congestion about the southeast of England, because that's where a lot of this traffic had to go through. The London area to get to Dover was one of the biggest traffic jams to get through. And that was constraining access to markets for Scottish goods and imports. We found that, like the other ferry services and motorways of the sea services, the service had to be fast, frequent and reliable. By frequent, this means it had to be really daily, ideally daily. We found that the direct, a fast conventional RoPax service at the time, before the fuel price increases of the last decade, would be viable after a startup period. But the sailings and arrival times would need to be provided to meet the market needs. And port locations, facilities, tariffs are all very important aspects here. And the question was raised because no market provider had come forward to provide this service, and we at the time were simply studying it on a speculative basis. The economic agency was saying, what do we do? How do we get an operator? and the suggestion was made we just tender it, have a competition. The problem was there was no subsidy. So the question was, would an operator come forward and provide a service with no operating subsidy? There was a support for the terminal facilities, but no operating subsidy. So this was a question, but it was decided to go ahead with a tender anyway. And this is what the tender looked like. I'll just quickly go through it. So there was some clarification of what public support there would be, but that was mostly on marketing, tourism, if it was a passenger ferry, and also some support for the terminal. The Enterprise Agency established a steering group. The idea then was to provide information to the marketplace, not the full information, but some of the information on the opportunity, and that led to expressions of interest. Further market data was provided, then final bids were requested, detailed information was given, then bids were shortlisted, and then the idea was to select the winning bid, have some kind of contract, but I don't think it was a particularly tight contract in terms of longevity. It was a kind of flexible contract. There was no operating subsidy was provided. So pretty much 100% of the risk was on the operator to provide this motorway of the sea on a completely new service, on a speculative basis, with no underwriting by the state, pretty much. So what we can say here is what happened was an operator was selected. The company was a Greek company, Superfast, who provided 2 ships, each worth, I think, 100 million euros. So it was an investment of 200 million euros, plus the terminal at Rosyth cost, I think, about 30 million pounds to upgrade, of which about 1/3 was provided by the UK government, by a Freight Facilities Grant, and some support by the European Commission's PACT programme. So the service started, but it was mostly fundamentally at private risk. And it started in 2002, May 17. And this is some pictures of the terminal at Rosyth, which we'll be going to see tomorrow. This was, initially it was created a double level link span, so you had freight coming on the lower level and cars above. That probably wasn't fundamentally required because it wasn't a fast turnaround service. The ship was so fast coming across the North Sea that it could stay in port for most of the day. And so it didn't really require to have a very rapid turnaround. Today it's changed into a freight operation only, but I think there is still hope that the passenger service might return. Since the Superfast operation with the 2 large red vessels, Norfolk Line operated the service for a few years, and now it's DFDS in a freight mode. So it still operates very well on freight, and my understanding is there's a need for more capacity to go on the service now, which is quite good, but it's still a challenging opportunity, a challenging motorway of the sea in that sense. But one of the statements from the operator of the initial service was who the main competitor was. And the main competitor was Rhodes. The main competitor to this service is Rhodes, to the south of England port. And that is the reality. And finally, we did a study for the UK Department of Transport and EPSRC to look at, again, at this issue about UK domestic services. We were very interested in the Japanese experience and other experiences, but in the Italian experience, where you have a domestic service and quite a lot of domestic services running against parallel to highways. And we did the same again for the UK. And here were some of the routes we looked at. Again, the Forth to Tees, down to London, Thames, the Clyde to the Mersey, and also Aberdeen. A whole range of routes we looked at with Harriet Watt and other colleagues. And routes were largely based on analysis of road traffic flows, GDP, population, and traffic constraints. And we looked at, again, a range of ships, the fast conventional, the high speed, and the conventional 20 knots. So three completely different concepts, different offerings, and they provided different levels of frequency, transit time, and reliability. And what this graph shows really is that there are different commodities fitting into at that time there were different groups of cargoes that required really fast speed and different cargoes that were quite happy to take the slow speed. So lower value bulk type of commodities would quite happily take the slow services, whereas fast moving, really fast like parcels cargoes would require something very, very rapid like a high speed service. So it was difficult to get all the market into the one type of ship. So there were different markets. But most of the trucks were kind of in the middle here, looking at a sort of fast ferry, but not too fast. And this had a tremendous impact on the issues to do with cost. And then this was work largely done by Harriet Watt, Alan McKinnon and Clive Marchant, on looking at where coastal shipping was positioned in relation to other modes, rail freight and road freight. And here you can see road freight was much more focused on the quick response, shorter lead time, but rail freight was also looking at able to provide a faster solution than coastal shipping, especially the conventional ferry. So the conventional ferry was kind of a longer lead time, low cost response in a coastal shipping context with a mature transport market like the UK in a domestic sense. So a much bigger challenge for motorways of the sea at the domestic level. And the idea here is that we found most trucks, most demand would be in that middle section where sea transport would have to provide a transit time that's competitive with rail and a lot of trucks, a lot of road transport. So the findings here were that UK coastal routes really required quite a fast solution. We found that the cost per sea mile could be competitive with road, but only with the ship. The door-to-door cost, the initial and final distribution by road added more costs to the service, and it really wasn't competitive with that added on, which provided the problem. High frequency was important. There would be environmental benefits. We found reduced external costs, although emissions is an aspect that really requires careful analysis on each ship type, because we've since found then that some ships are less efficient than other ships, and not all shipping has the same emissions. A lot depends on obviously the engine power and the economies of scale, the size of the ship, as well as the length of the route and the speed of the vessel. But we did find that present market distortions do tend to favour land transport, in that still this sea transport seaway corridor is expected to be provided by a market. Whereas road and rail, if we look at national government budgets, is largely provided by the taxpayer. And that produces that additional challenge for the seaway. And the conclusion from this study, like some of the other ones, is that the market acting alone is unlikely to provide the modal shift solution. It needs other incentives to make it actually be realized. So our conclusions and maybe some recommendations from the UK Marine Motorway study some years ago was to provide incentives to hauliers, which has since been done to some degree of success in Italy with the eco-bonus. To also share the startup risks, at least for the first 2 to 3 years, which is what the Motorways of the Sea Marco Polo program does to some extent. to improve port infrastructure and to lower port tariffs. And port tariffs, as we know, are quite often not related to the cost of the infrastructure. In some places also related to the tradition and the level of monopoly power. And the need to reduce road transport costs to and from ports for the initial and final distribution. But we also found that it's possible for transport authorities to introduce marine motorways, or motorways of the sea, via competitive tender. As we found with the Scotland Continent Rosyth-Brugge service, it's possible to select an operator on the basis of a competitive tender. In that case, even without operating subsidy, where they believe there's a market opportunity. But where there's a need to equalise the costs of land transport, then there is a need for some incentive. And there's also a requirement for ongoing public support and market research and promotion. So I think some of these issues here, motorways of the sea can be international or domestic. There's a focus on trailers, but these services also quite often carry containers. There is a widespread use nowadays of RoPax vessels which carry passengers as well as trucks and cars. There is still a focus on quite fast ships to some extent, but the trend is towards slowing down vessels because of the fuel price increases. And the focus, there's still an emphasis on high frequency service and high quality terminals. But still, one of the key issues here is this distinction between roadway, railway and seaway, and how these are treated differently in the policy domain. We also found some reflections on other research at the time which gave us an idea of an indication of what the challenge of moving cargo from road to sea really is. And this is a statement by Dr. Elsner from the European Commission in 2001, which basically denotes the view of logistics companies. I have to move the goods. The first reaction is to phone the truck. Where is the truck? And that's understood. The truck is required to carry the goods initially and finally. And also there was a perception that short sea shipping was too slow, less reliable. There were weaknesses relating to ports, and there was a poor image. And other research suggested that, sea could be more competitive than trucking, but only over longer distances. Longer distances, let's say over 400, 500 nautical miles. But any focus on costs should include internal and external costs. So there was perception barriers and other problems. And here we can see some other ones. Other studies showed there was administrative and operational barriers to overcome. Port charges needed reduced. Some integration problems were needed to overcome. But modal switching to short sea shipping could also be induced through imposition of things like an eco-tax on road transport. And then another study suggested that there needed to be a focus on key elements like transit time, price, reliability, frequency, and then overcoming this image problem. But there are also in every situation these specific variables that might happen in a particular location but not in others, what they regard as situational variables, can affect the competitiveness of motorways of the sea. But I think looking at this picture, you can see the requirement of the motorway of the sea, which is the mobile infrastructure, which is in effect the ship. And we still are at the stage today where that definition is not fully accepted by transport decision makers and funders. And budgets still don't regard the seaway as in the same way as they do road and railway infrastructure. And this issue about maritime transport infrastructure only being the port kind of makes the challenge more difficult. So the suggestion here is we should consider motorways of the sea as equivalent transport platform to a land motorway. And to some extent, policy is moving in that direction. We can see here from the EU 10T high-level group, or the Van Meert group statement in 2004, that motorways of the sea are indeed floating infrastructure. So there was an acceptance even then, 10 years ago, that this was the case. And in a French study by GIE, which I think Javier Hezé will talk about, the French approach to this motorways of the sea policy, is that there's a recognition in France here that the public financing is necessary for what they call boat infrastructure to compete or to take traffic from road to sea. And as the Commission has mentioned to Member States, the 10T programme, Motorways of the Sea programme, is only part of the funding package. It's permissible for Member States to support Motorways of the Sea initiatives if they wish. And this we can see in the case today of France and Spain, and also the Italian eco-book. So, and to some extent, the UK Freight Facilities Grant, which has had a very limited effect because it's not a significant funding. But this opportunity is available for transport authorities to fund motorways of the sea. And just to conclude, really, land transport, I suppose, can't really function without first creating the roadways and railway as intermodal platforms. And I would certainly say that the sea is pretty useless as a transport mode without a platform. It's not a free highway in that sense. So the ship platform is necessary to convey vehicles. This may sound theoretical, but actually in an applied sense, it's a real difficulty if you're a ship owner and you want to come into a marketplace to provide a motorway of the sea to take traffic from publicly funded roads. A very big challenge. And the ship's deck in that sense is the seaway. And in that sense also the ship's deck is the infrastructure equivalent of roadway and railway infrastructure. So, and this picture really just goes to emphasize that the sea is not a free highway, and the sea is not in itself a transport mode, neither is water. It's only liquid. You need to provide the platform, which is, as we mentioned there, but the platform increasingly is all types of different ships that provide the mobile infrastructure equivalent to roadway and railway. Whether it's a ro-ro ferry, a container ship, or a passenger and freight ferry. It's the maritime transport platform is the ship, and the ship provides for that territorial continuity in the same way as a roadway and a railway platform offers the same opportunity. So the seaway transport platform, it is argued here anyway, is the ship. Ship is therefore infrastructure mobile and provides the territorial continuity, and maritime transport therefore maritime transport infrastructure is not the port per se. The maritime transport infrastructure is fundamentally and that brings us to a slightly different definition from what we've seen up to now. This is published last year in an article by Javier Hezé and myself. And here the definition is really focused on motorways of the sea, where we see different elements here. The motorways of the sea is the mobile ship structure itself, which creates a motorway of the sea transport platform between two or more ports, which combined then with the port interchange and the intermodal land connections offers the essential quality features for users that can be or are comparable with an alternative land motorway. So the motorway of the sea is fundamentally the maritime transport infrastructure, which is the ship infrastructure, with the port interchange and the intermodal land connections, providing the total door-to-door chain potential as an alternative to land transport. But the fundamental definition here is slightly different from saying that the port is maritime transport. That's pretty meaningless in the context of motorways of the sea. What's fundamental is the seaway. That's the article that most of this is drawn from. It was published, I think, in 2010 in Civil Engineering. And that's back to the Netherlands Short Sea Shipping Promotion article. But we could see, in a sense, the road transport infrastructure and the maritime transport infrastructure. And I don't see a port there. But ports, of course, will argue that ports are maritime transport infrastructure because that allows them to say to governments, you know, we need to be funded and so on. But it kind of ignores the seaway leg, which is also very important in that context. That's really the end of that as a Motorways of the Sea concept. So I'm happy to take any questions or you may have. Yeah, I think one of the...
You should repeat the question. Yeah. For the outside listeners, before you hear the answer.
Yes. Well, the question was basically about what would happen if governments were to finance the ship in relation to publicly funded road and rail. And I think, and the idea of propulsion, the engine is provided by the truck and the train. And I think one of the arguments is that you can split the ship up into elements as well. You can split the ship up into propulsion, navigation, and also the deck. And that might be the three main cost components of the ship. So you could actually extract the propulsion from it as provided by the operator and the navigation systems, cabin, and the bridge system. And that leaves the deck, which is the platform. And I think there's at least one study has come to that kind of view that you can actually allocate some of the costs of the ship. I don't think this is about government providing ships, as was the case in the Via Mare service. The market will probably still need to provide the vessels, but in many cases they need a bit more incentive, and the user needs the incentive as well. And I think this is where the incentive in Italy was very important. The eco-bonus provided the incentive to the truck driver to say, to choose between road and sea, and that was a good option. But the difficulty is, can you sustain that kind of funding requirement in the long term? And I think in the case of the eco-bonus, it's not been possible.
So how would you share this? I mean, I do agree that engines are very expensive, but engines are very cheap compared to tracks, especially tracks in built-up areas. Endlessly expensive. So how much of your ship would you, I mean, deck, extremely cheap in the ship, it costs practically nothing. It's engines and the hull and the bridge kind of stuff that costs money. So, I mean, if you would compare, I mean, infrastructure in rail, if you compare, say, with rail,
Yeah.
it's very, very expensive compared to the total.
Yeah.
And in the ship, the deck is nearly for free when you build the rest of it.
Yeah, I don't know if that's particularly true. My understanding is the ship hull, because it might be many thousands of tons of steel.
Depends how you split it. Where
Yeah,
you split it.
a four-deck ro-ro vessel carrying 300 trucks is a large steel structure. Ships today are now the biggest structures in the world. Some of them.
That's what in the road.
So, but there's a lot of steel in them. So the cost components might well not be split as the way you suggest, and the propulsion could actually be a third or less, as well as the navigation system, another third, and then the hull the rest. So it
I mean, roughly a third.
it could be a third each, depending on the ship.
Does the channel situation give help in trying to locate that very big
The Channel Tunnel.
yeah, you've got the traditional road ferry
The shuttle.
the tunnel really important.
Well, of course, the nightmare scenario for the ferry industry with the tunnel was always if the tunnel went bust, the debt would be written off and it would be able to charge low rates. So that was always the nightmare scenario. That's not quite come to pass, but my understanding is today most of the freight still goes on the ferries. Most of the cars still goes on the ferries, but most of the passengers go on the trains. But still 13 million people take the ferries across a year, and I think it's about 2.5 million cars and 2.5 million trucks. So it's the biggest straits crossing in Europe, I think.
But seems to me that the channel ferry system doesn't equate to seaweed concept.
No.
What you see in the pictures are kilometers of parked lorries. It's not the system, but it obviously seems to be will function.
Yeah.
Some way.
It does function. I think road actually is, one of the other challenges for motorways of the sea is road is actually very efficient. Road transport is very efficient. And vehicles are beginning to get more efficient. So motorways of the sea has a challenge to overcome. And one of the ways it's been able to do that on long routes is to upsize the vessel. If you upsize the vessel, increase the capacity, you don't increase in the same way the power. So ship economies of scale are the way that motorways of the sea can really be effective over long routes. Small vessels are less efficient, much less efficient on long routes. So economies of scale are the best option for, I think, sea transport. And we can see that on the North Sea. You know, the typical ferry on the North Sea now is above 3,000 lane meters. That's more than 250 trucks. And that's the standard size. If you have a ship smaller than that on a long route, less efficient. And it's less able to compete against trucking. So the thing about sea transport is its opportunity, motorways of the sea, is growing the size of ship, which that option isn't really that available to trucking unless you really dramatically increase the size of trucks, which is being considered anyway.
The trucking industry has also understood this. So, I mean, there's high pressure for increasing the size of trucks.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we have 24 meters already in Sweden, and there's a strong pressure for domestic 32 meters.
Yeah.
Which saves 30% energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I mean, remember, trucks Euro 6 engines, it's very efficient, very environmental friendly, but still creates congestion.
Yes.
As much congestion as any other kind of engine does. And that has no real value in the calculations we do. Really get it.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. I think we'll close there. In 5 minutes we'll start the final lecture. Thank you.
Yes.
It's, here? Yes. So this is bookmarks. Yes. No, it's all right.
It's all running?
It's all right. Yeah.
No, it's running.
Okay. My name is Xavier Zessin. I'm going to give the third lecture in this course. I work in Puertos del Estado. It's a four-state agency in Spain. And I'm also taking a PhD in Edinburgh Napier University under the supervision of Professor Bird and Professor Kevin Berman. And this lecture is about the Motorways of the Sea initiatives at member state level. Before we enter in detail about some of the initiatives several member states have undertaken to promote motorways of the sea, we have to understand and get brief ideas or undertakings that the framework where these member states are taking this initiative. This framework is mainly the transport policy in the European Union, and after that we can analyze the different undertakings. The contents will be like that. As Motorways of the Sea policy using the European transport policy. Even Professor Gerd in a further lecture will explain and go in deep in this Motorways of the Sea policy in Europe, but this could be a kind of framework we have to understand the different member state level initiatives and why they have taken these initiatives. We can analyze what we think were the more important initiatives around member states, but of course these initiatives are not all the initiatives at European level, but maybe are the main ones. First of all, we have to understand that most policy within the European transport policy, it's a very important issue in a region, economic region like Europe, considering the characteristics of Europe. We have around 70,000 kilometers of coast, and we have a population similar to other economic blocks in North America, but in a more reduced land space. So looking at the map, we can understand that the communications, the shortest communications among many regions in Europe are through the sea. It's not necessary to go through the land. The European Commission has been promoting for many years the deployment of short-sea shipping services, and in different policies has stressed the necessity to promote this mode. If we start with transport policy, but also with the integrated maritime policy in the European Union, we found that in this integrated maritime policy, which tries to keep all the interesting issues in maritime policy, transport, but also preservation of the environment and the efficient use of all the resources we have in a sustainable way. In these studies in 2008 to 2007, we can see that this study, which was keeping with a survey, an important survey open to all stakeholders interested or we have to deal with maritime policy. One of the issues that arose in this study was that making policy should be made with a participating way, not rather to a top-down strategy, but have all people the opportunity to have the words on the future policy. In some projects, we can contemplate there the necessity to facilitate the movement of goods, and this was the name of the EU Space Without Barriers, because in fact we can find barriers to the free movement of goods around Europe. And also in that time was the reduction of ships emissions, which these days is very important, and we have many initiatives to use more fuel environment friendly for the maritime industry. We found we can see in these previous studies that ships emissions was an important issue, and marine research was an issue that has to be developed also. They contemplate programs to develop and support motorways of the sea and short-sea shipping, and in this document they stated that there was a disadvantage between shipping and other means of transport, as had been said previously in the lecture of Professor Berg. Really, we understand that in land models, either road and rail currently are financed by the public administration, while in shipping we have to face big investments on the private side, and this is difficult to overcome and to compare and to compete in a fair way. What the transport policy in Europe aims? Well, we have to get back to the European Union principles. One of the European Union principles is the free movement of people and goods capitals and as a superior objective. This only can be done if we have a really efficient transport system. If we have restrictions to this movement, we can no longer assure this main aim of the European Union is that the free movement of goods and people around the European space. How can we assure this efficient and sustainable transport system? Well, because we can combine different transport systems around the same chain, the issue is to optimize the chain and to the best use of each mode of this transport chain. We can identify in many transport chains that it can be, we have several alternatives, and sometimes is our only mode left, so we can go all the road, the way in road, or we can combine with other means like rail or maritime transport. In that case, if we can find advantages in this maritime leg, this will be a good issue to optimize the different transport and the transport chain as a whole. This it will need to be effective for the movement of people and movement of industry. This, as you know, at least in road and in the ship maritime industry with the ferries, many times we use the same vehicle, the same infrastructure for people trade, and this is to get the more effective way to move our people and trade around the European space, and use the more energy efficient system, which at the same time will be efficient in itself, but also environmental friendly. That is to mean to reduce the harmful effects that transport as other activities has. First of all, we have the congestion we have talked before. Second, we can say about the CO2 emissions and the climate change strategy, and of course the space, air and noise pollution. So when we talk about optimization of the transport chain, we have to take in account all these externalities that sometimes are not properly considered. The space, air and noise pollution is an important issue too. Even sometimes we mention and we talk only about CO2 emissions, but we know now that space is also an important issue, because when we need a new infrastructure or a development of an existing one, we will need sometimes more space, and space is a scarcely resource. Every time is more scarce. that reason, the European Union has a compromise to develop a trans-European transport network that will link all the Union with the more efficient way. In this transport network, it will dedicate the main resources, and these days we are in a process to define this new trans-European transport network, which after the previous tentatives and previous networks we have, the new one is this is composed by a comprehensive or general transport network, and among these a special core network, which will be the, let's say, the backbone of the transport in all the Europe. In these days, the Commission sent a proposal to the European Parliament and the Council, and we are in this in the process to the approval of this new trans-European transport network. There has been very strong, I can say, strong discussions about how this core network, the main network, will be, and the focus has been on defined corridors among the European space in order to assure that it's really a trans-European transport network, because previous initiatives and measures which were to help to plus European resources in different member states sometimes were used to develop the network inside each member state, but not the connections, transborder connections among member states. With this focus on corridors and corridors that are crossing several of our European countries, is going to facilitate this movement, transborder movement, that is needed in all the European space. As has been also said, we can see the performance of different modes on freight, that case is freight, in billions of ton kilometers, and we can see that road is keeping the main part of this transport in tons per kilometer, and we can see that also that the sea transport is keeping with this challenge lower than the road, but following the same rates, and still rail remains a bit lower, and inland waterways even is also a very efficient environmental friendly mode. We can say that yes, can be used where it's possible, but is already up to now is a solution for special situations where it is possible to move and to promote inland waterways. And air is a specialty for special freight only, So the main part can we see is road, sea, and rail. Rail a big distance, even many resources have been compromising for development of the network and the connections and the supply and making working against the bottlenecks we have in the rail system in Europe, which is with many different systems and safety systems also, and we can say that even with rail we have to promote all the possibilities we have, but our main issue to tackle the expected growth in the freight movements in Europe is to use the sea against unsustainable growth in road traffic. In different documents, the European Union has studied the aspects of environment impact and the logistics, and we can summarize here when we look at the European transport policy, we can see that with the issue of environmental impact and sustainability, the course or the recommendation is that somehow that we state that global impact has to be reduced because they are big. If we consider the issue charging and pricing, the recommendation is to consider true cost, because sometimes there are many costs that are hidden costs and are not contemplated. And especially emphasis, especially interest are in internalizing the external cost. That means that when we are going to fix the prices for the transport, we have to keep in mind not only the fuel cost or the labor cost or the capital cost, but also these external costs we have seen previously. That means how this transport is contributing to the CO2 emissions and to the noise, space, and pollution, and of course the congestion issue. In logistics and intermodality, we comprehensive focus on logistics and transport, and we can no longer analyze the transport without considering part of the objective of transport. That means in a comprehensive way of considering logistics. Logistics which will use transport as a part of this necessity. We have the necessity to move freight from one place of Europe to another. We need to move in time, and this is part of all the full logistics of this freight. And that recommendation is to the necessity to promote intermodality to reduce these external costs and have a more efficient and sustainable transport system. Several times in these documents and studies, we can see the words motorways of the sea and source shipping. All the times, the promoters or the writers agree that must be promoted as part of the multimodal transport chains, and because all recognize this environmental friendly dimension or green dimension and the potential it has if we are able to shift part of the cargo on road to transport. As has been said, road transport is increasingly going more environmental friendly in some way, in the way that engines are more efficient and with less emissions every time. But we we still have this issue of congestion that is a space and intensive space use of the main motorways, land motorways, and it can be tackled with alternatives that can constitute this shipping, source shipping and motorways of the sea. Ports are a key issue for the development of source shipping and motorways of the sea, even they are the nodes of the network. One of the issues that there is that some services must improve the adequacy to source shipping, what is an important issue because in main ports in Europe, the strategy for the improvement of port services has been focused not in source shipping, but in ocean-bound shipping. So, for let's say main ports has defined the characteristics and the performance of port services, focusing mainly in big vessels, the vessels coming from other continents. While in many cases these services are not adequately dimensioned and defined for the use and efficient use of sources. Well, and we have also the issue of administrative formalities. Well, it's an issue that we have been working for many years, and still a long way to optimize. But we have to recognize that we can no longer have an efficient source shipping transport if we are treating the goods on these vessels in the same way as the goods which are coming from third countries with absolutely a burden administrative of formalities. Well, we understand that customs has the role in our economy, but the issue is to use new technologies for the implementation of this necessity. We can implement the new technologies, vessel traffic services, and long run identification of ships via satellite to control that these vessels has been sailing from one European port and has arrived to another European port without no other interchange of merchandising in the middle of the sea, which will provide a broken of the coastal roads. The issue of environmental impact of transport and sustainability, we have to remember that the white papers we developed previously on that said that we need to develop environmental objectives for the transport with the communication in 2008 named cleaning transport. That means we have to move transport to a way that was more environmental friendly and can be qualified as a sustainable transport. The strategy for internalization of external costs in the same year try to identify with not without difficulties what were really the external costs for different modes, and even there is not a complete agreement on what the real external costs are in the different modes. We can at least agree that we have to reduce these harmful effects of transport, and consequently in the future transport we will need to support efficient transport more efficient, and with that the support the promotion of motorways of the sea and short CCP. The ports, as you said, are important parts of this strategy. Sometimes it has been said that in the ports we can have these bottlenecks for this promotion, and not only for the services. We have said that sometimes are not very adequate for short shipping and motorways of the sea, but also for the hinterland connections they have. Or even we have good port services and good maritime entrance to the port, and it would be difficult if we have not this hinterland efficient hinterland connection to the main motorways or rails in the country and the continent. The coordinator of motorways of the sea at the European Commission level, Luis Valente de Oliveira, in one of his reports about the promotion of motorways of the sea, stressed the necessity to have indicators of ports serving motorways of the sea, and he also stressed that at these days southern ports should increase quality performance. Hence, other ports in the center of Northern Europe. And keep in mind that nodes are these ports are nodes of the network and can be performed, but we can't forget that plus the node we have the link. The administrative formalities is one of the issues that in different studies has tackled. Some administrative barriers is harming the growth of source shipping, and several initiatives have been carried on to have this reduction or this improvement of administrative facilities. We can only mention a few of them, like this Blue Belt initiative, which is trying to simplify custom procedures applied to e-goods, as has been said. The national single window, the directive 2010 is going to be developed, but it has to be developed in a coherent implementing way around Europe. And there are other initiatives like e-maritime and e-freight, which are trying to use the electronic information for reduce the administrative burden of formalities, and with the e-freight to facilitate the interchange information of between the different stakeholders or participants of the transport. The one significant issue more about motorways of the sea is in the revision of the 10T in 2003. They established a new project, which will be the 21 project of this revision of the Trans-European Transport Network. And this project was the development of motorways of the sea. There were a total of 29 projects, priority projects, but this was a very different one. The project number 21, development of motorways of the sea, identified 4 main areas of development of these motorways: the Baltic Sea, the Western Europe, Southeast Europe, and Southwest Europe. These big areas were to be places where new motorways of the sea has to be developed. But the issue is that all the rest of these 39 priority projects in the Trans-European Transport Network are infrastructure projects, while motorways of the sea is mainly a service and not just an infrastructure. So this has to be taken into account, because it's not enough to provide infrastructure, at least infrastructure in the current way we understand infrastructure. Like many times has been understood that providing infrastructure is to facilitate the development of ports, so these ports could be used easily by the motorways. But the concept we have previously commented by Professor Berg, we understand that these nodes is only a part of the infrastructure and not the main one. The financial assistance for projects is a preferred instrument of policymakers. So that is the reason why we have this summary picture of the financial instruments that the European Union has to improve, to promote this sustainable transport or efficient transport. Among these instruments we have cohesion funds, the TEN-T funds, with the development of the Trans-European Transport Network. We have also funds. The Marco Polo funds addressed mainly to companies which plan to shift cargo from roads to sea. And also we have loans on loan guarantees of the European investment banks, which are not are loans, nor are grants, but also have the potential to facilitate the investments and the development of projects. And we have also the granted of the member states. So member states has under some conditions the capability to subsidize initiatives that could promote more efficient transport. And this is the issue that has differentiated in most cases the different strategies of member states. How member states has placed their strategy to promote these source sea and motorways of the sea. We can also say that among these financial instruments, they are very diverse and not very sometimes coherent approach. So if we look at this motorways of the sea promoted under Marco Polo scheme, we can there say that we have a maximum of 35% of operating costs for all the funding applied, and a maximum duration of 5 years. And these funds can also be compatible with state aid, European Regional Development Fund, and Cohesion Fund. If we look at these motorways of the sea project under the Trans-European Transport Network funding system, we can have, in that case, 30% of capital cost for all funding applied, or depending, of course, if there are studies, could arrive to 50%, but when we go to the capital cost, where is different, and the duration is different. So we have there different strategies that complicate the issue. Going straight to the different approach we have on different countries, we first have to mention the most policy established between Spain and France to promote motorways of the sea. Why member states have decided to go to a specific member state strategy to promote motorways of the sea? Well, we can agree that the needs of motorways of the sea among member states are different, and probably member states who are peripheral in the European Union have more necessity to promote the motorways of the sea and short sea shipping rather than a country in Central Europe. Well, in this sense, the European Commission agree with member states that two member states can decide to promote the motorways of the sea by promoting or calling for a tender for new maritime services, short sea services with high quality that we can call motorways of the sea, and define the conditions and how this tender will be. In that case, between Spain and France, the main necessity was in the Atlantic side, because in the Mediterranean there were also already different services sailing from Italy to Spain mainly, and on the other hand we have this Atlantic side with many land traffic crossing the Pyrenees, and with harmful effects in near the gate of the Pyrenees with very high congestion. Traffic, which characteristics has this policy or this tender that France and Spain called? Well, the decision was to evaluate this H project in accordance with this rate. The traffic shifted from the road will count about 30%. The project quality, because we look for high quality and sustainable transport, will rate of 35%, and the business plan, according to the expected growth of this traffic and the economics of this traffic, will at that time rate for 35%. These were the main evaluation criteria. The traffic shifted from the road could be evaluated in tons kilometer, but mainly in lorries and semi-trailers. So at the end, how many units from the road you will shift to the sea? In fact, the subsidy, if we have a plan to subsidize with 30 million euros for each motorway, the real quantity to be subsidized will depend on the real number of units shifted from the road. In that time, the plan was to You see no less than 25,000 units on the first year, growing to 100,000 for the fourth year, and keep with a total among 10 years for 850,000 units could be shifted from road to sea. The project quality, in that case, was identified by the number of ports in Spain, the calls per week, frequency, quality and land access, quality of telematic systems, and quality of port facilities. Frequency being maybe one of the king parameter for the quality of this service. It has to be provided with 4 calls per week on the first year, and after the third year, 1 call per day. Two services were awarded with this grant. One from Gijón to Nantes and Nasser, and the other, let's say, with 2 legs, Vigo, Saint Nazaire, Vigo, Le Havre, with a complementing leg linking the south, Algeciras, with Vigo. The Gijón Nantes and Nasser started in the end of 2010, and the Vigo Nantes is still changing with administrative issues, because among other things, the previous shipping line to go to the tender give up, and now is transferring the right to another company. One of the issues that is important to keep in mind on this call was that you need to have at least 1 port on each country and a shipping line, plus other stakeholders that can bring a more wide consortium, but you will need, of course, a shipping line and 2 ports. One, at least 2 ports, 1 from each country. When I say ports, in Spain means terminal operators. When I say ports in France, will either mean terminal operators or port authorities.
just have to wait for it to stop function.
Yeah. Stop function. No.
Right.
Maybe the lecture was not good enough.
I think it just overheated, but I think it seems to be. Right.
Okay. This is the output of the tender. I have comment before. On one hand, we have this Vigos and Nasser, which is still pending of formal start. But the other was the consortia of Grimaldi, Luis Dreyfus as shipping lines, and Nentes and Nasser and Gijón, the port involved. This is a sailing of 14 hours, and the conditions were for departures per week. At the beginning, going to 5 departures per week after the third year. It was provided for ROPAX and also for an accompanied railroad traffic. This was the result of the output of the tender. The reality was that Grimaldi Lines depart this and is currently provided by Dreyfus, so has been also been in a joint use with other sailing, but the main shipping line is that cares is Dreyfus. And the tender, I was saying before that for France has the possibility that the port was the port authority or a port operator, while in Spain the port will mean the port operator. The reason is that in Spain port operations are always provided by private companies. In that case, the terminal where the operations will take place will be a private company. While in France, sometimes the operations were carried out by the administration, and so the tender has to take in account this specificity of the Spanish and French port model. In the case of France, because once the tender has been awarded, they have to constitute a consortium who will be the one who operates the motorways of the sea, and this consortium will receive the funding from France and Spain. In that case, it was a limitation that if the Port Authority of France has been awarded, only could have a 10% of the consortium. The reason was to assure that the service, the operation, was mainly a private operation. It wouldn't be no sense that finally we have a mainly public operator for these motorways of the sea, subsidized by the public administrations of Spain and France. In the West Mediterranean, we have already several, we can say, successful services linking ports of Italy and Spain. They are high quality shipping services with high frequency, sometimes 4 or 5, even 6 calls per week. And the issue is, are there already motorways of the sea? And well, we can understand that still we can and we have to improve these services, but most of their characteristics are characteristics that we can identify with motorways of the sea. In Italy, the main issue or main initiative at member state level, it was the Ecobonus scheme. In that case, rather than subsidize the offer, the infrastructure or the provider of services, the issue is to place a state aid for lorry drivers, transport companies or trucking associations, that in order to incentivize that these users of the maritime traffic use this maritime traffic rather than use all the way the land motorways or the land roads. How? Well, it has some conditions, but we can summarize there. One of the conditions that time were in place. One of these was that the Ecobonus will constitute an aid of 20% or 30% of the cost of taking the seaway price. So if the lorry takes the ship, it will get up 20% of this price in existing roads, current roads at that time, or 30% if are new roads. There was a minimum number of trips. If you are a company and you have only 3, 4, or 20 or 40 trips per year, you can have this aid. The minimum of 80 trips is to assure that you are compromised with this new motorways of the sea system. And not only that, but you have to compromise similar volumes for at least 3 years. So that means that this transport company or association has a compromise medium or can compromise and not only a small strategy for 1 year. Most policy in the United Kingdom. Well, the promotion of short sea shipping rather than motorways of the sea could be summarized with these initiatives of freight facility grants for rail and water, well, just to encourage, to promote the transfer of freight from road to rail or water. And another one with waterborne freight grant which could assist the first course. The UK shipping has on shipping freight from traffic from road. Well, we understand that the concept is to help, but the reality was that the quantities were not big enough, so really were not significant, and mainly as a reaction of the problems that arise when many lorries went from the north to south. In terms of 2007, we have around 40 million tons moving from, let's say, Scotland to the south of England, and this has to be tackled with something, and this was initiatives, but initiative we can qualify as reaction, reaction to the problem rather than focus on a new alternative. We have subsidy, incentive, road tolls, and port infrastructure. These are means that it could be used to improve this. Sometimes if we have road without tolls, what is cheaper, and we are not paying for the infrastructure we are using, and or at least we are not paying as user. Maybe we are paying as a tax, among other things, but not as the user pays principle is not being used. And sometimes in that case the port infrastructure should be improved. We can also comment even about policies, if we can say policies considered or initiatives made best in the Baltic and North Sea region, even maybe it will be treated widely by in tomorrow by Alf. But just to mention that one of the interesting initiatives was the project STRATMOS, Strategic Demonstration Project for Motorways of the Sea, to undertake several studies like the Northern Maritime Corridor and accessibility to peripheral areas. These two studies, mainly the second one, is to consider that even Motorways of the Sea main objectives could be to shift traffic from road to sea. We can also consider a part of these objectives of source shipping, at least, is to provide accessibility to peripheral areas, and that means to promote the territorial cohesion and social cohesion among Europe, which somehow was also treated in this project. Smooth operations was another of these studies, and taking in account that in ports, at least in the Baltic ports, according to the study they carried out, most calls and use of quays were for, let's say, medium small ships. That means that more than 60% could be was used by these ships with carrying capacity less than 1,500 TEUs, but only 25% of total handling was attributed to this. There are another interesting issue that the floating container storage and transshipment terminal, an innovative and efficient system that could provide interesting solutions in many places to handle containers, especially in the transshipment issue. And finally, also to consider the role that barges can have in the hinterland connection of freight. This is the North Sea area, and the Baltic Sea area. Both will be the principal this part. And another initiative that we can add here is the call for tender for Motorways of the Sea project in the North Sea region that jointly Belgium and the Flemish region of Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Ireland, Netherlands, Sweden, the United Kingdom and Norway jointly call for tender. And that the objective of this tender was to enable to provide a framework and how different stakeholders, different initiatives could bid for the European Motorways of the Sea funding based in the transport among ports of this region or ports or transport who has an origin on this region. In this call for tender, as in the case I previously commented on the France and Spain tender, there was also this condition. At least two ports from two different member states should be, and of course, a maritime transport operator. But also terminal operators and road haulers and other stakeholders could attend. Finally, some conclusions of this European framework for the promotion of short sea and motorways of the sea, and the initiatives we have seen from different countries. We can recognize that still there is an uneven playing field between road and sea transport for funding reasons mainly, but there are others like administrative formalities. Most development will need financial assistance, and according to this previous argument, and the policy to promote motorways of the sea has somehow been weak and diverse among different countries. The application processes were complex and difficult to attain. Really many contenders for not big quantities, and so sometimes interesting projects were refused, not because of the project itself, but because there was not enough funding. And we have to stress the necessity to internalization of external costs. And we have seen interesting examples of proactive supporting, like the eco-bonus system, which at that time was at the Italian level. So even was approved the application for the European Commission. The issue is for an effective application of this concept, we have to go to a European level. I know that currently there are several applications for funds at the European Commission to study the characteristics and the influence of a eco-bonus system around Europe. And this, of course, is a promising, interesting issue to be developed. So this is all the issue. If you have any other question, you have.
Is it one statement and one question? I was on the board, I was on the expert panel.
Yeah.
Reading actually the proposal for this line that you now said has still not come online, still not working. I mean, is it meaningful if there is such a delay afterwards? I mean, it's a good idea, but
yeah.
Is it meaningful to discuss it at all if there is such a possibility that it ends up in whatever administrative
yeah.
ludicrousy afterwards, and it never gets working?
The administrative burden for the implementing
You have one.
But one of the two didn't work, you said. No, they are, but I mean, it still hasn't got going. One of the two services you talked about.
Yeah. The Gijón Nantes is working.
Yeah.
Is working, and the other is now adapting to the new situation, because in that case the shipping line give up, and it was contemplated in the tender that you can transfer you rights to another, but the issue is not easy, and there were several negotiations with shipping lines and the France and Spanish administration, and now it seems that it's going to start with another, with this Vapores Suerdia, another shipping line. Yeah.
And how long has it taken?
How long
time has it been?
It's, so this is one of the issues that is not these processes are extremely long in time, and you know, it's several years after we try to start. We have also to say that in this meantime we have had the global recession, and that can be one of the explanations that has still lasting more than expected. But yeah, still there is it's a compromise from the Spanish and French administration to provide this funding if the consortia reach reach the agreement to move. Okay.
A technical question. If I include a link to a home page, on that home page we have a film